to our parallel event at CSW 65. This event was visioned and co-sponsored by the Vincentian family at the UN and UNANIMA International. Our event, Hidden Homelessness, Transforming Trauma to Empowerment. As an organizing group, we stand firmly behind the principles that all people, regardless of gender, are equal in dignity and rights. The hidden in hidden homelessness refers to not only the physical location of many of these experiences behind closed doors or in siloed areas of cities, but also to how our global society, through governance, definitions, and even data, underestimate the issue and lack understanding of what such experience look and feel like. Because of the hidden nature of the hidden issue of hidden homelessness, we must shine a light on it. It is essential that we bring this topic to the United Nations and the 65th session of the Commission on the Status of Women, because it's an opportune time to do so, with its relevant theme, women's full and effective participation and decision-making in public life, as well as the elimination of violence. My name is Jean Quinn, and I am a member of the community of the Daughters of Wisdom. Like our wonderful speakers today, Hanta, Sarah, Elsa Marie, and Marion, we share a common vision in our respective ways of wanting to make systemic changes in our world. I spent St. Patrick's Day with you yesterday, getting to know some of you. And as I read various things about each one of you, I realized all 5 of us had similar visions: to dream it, to wish it, and to do it. All of us wanting to make a difference and believing nothing is impossible if you put your heart into it. My mother used to say to me, "Don't say I cannot do it, but I can do it." This passion, which each of us have uniquely, will bring about the social change that is needed in our world. In 1997, I founded Sophia, a supportive housing organization in Ireland. And I guess we would say now it was a housing first model all those years ago. I was strong in the belief that women were traumatized by their homeless experience. They needed support to come out of it, and then to empower them to use their own creative voices for the unjust systems that they were experiencing. Politicization was very important to me, and I encouraged the women to use the system by taking them to meet parliamentarians, visit the parliament to see how decisions are made, and to engage them in using their vote. In my research over the years on homelessness, it brought me to many countries and experiences. In Europe, in North America, in South America, particularly up the mountains in Peru, understanding the basic Christian communities, which was led by women. In the Philippines, walking the sacred land where the people tried to create housing. In Mexico, where families became homeless after the disappearance of members of their families. And last year in Madagascar, where I visited the supportive housing project by the Vincentian family at Antananarivo. And now I am the executive director of UNANIMA International, a collaboration of 23 communities of women religious in 85 countries with 25,000 members. Our focus has always been on women, children, and girls. And more recently, we've been looking at homelessness and the various intersections of it, especially with women and girls, migrants and refugees, trafficking and homelessness, and indigenous women and homelessness. And so in 2017, UNANIMA International started talking about the need for a paradigm shift to understand homelessness as what it is, a human rights and civil rights issue. We need to understand what it means. It is an important change when our usual way of doing something is replaced by a new and different way. As part of this, we created a working definition of hidden homelessness. Shortly, we will get to our panelists, but it's important to have a sense of what we are talking about when we say hidden homelessness. The hidden homeless do not have a secure place to call home. They are people who remain in unsafe housing, relationships, or living situations. They are people who become homeless but find temporary solutions by staying with family, friends, or living in insecure accommodation. The situation for them is often short-term and unsustainable, meaning they end up in various kinds of shelters and emergency accommodations. This can be due to abuse and domestic violence. The hidden homeless often don't seek support as they don't want abusers to know where they are. That's a draft hidden homelessness definition. So we will obviously during this afternoon or this morning for many of you, look at this particular issue, hidden homelessness. Now I will introduce you to each speaker and have them give their initial reactions, their perspectives on today's topic and this working definition before moving to our question time. As you listen to each speaker, maybe take some time to ask yourself, what is touching your mind and heart this afternoon? What am I hearing that is new? And what might I like to engage more with in conversation, and with whom? It's my great privilege to introduce our first speaker, Hanta Fide Cyril Klein, a senior expert in diplomacy and international relations at the service of the Republic of Madagascar, and is presently the head of the political pole of the Centre for Analytical and Strategic Studies of the Foreign Ministry, and a senior advisor of the Cabinet of the President of the Senate of Madagascar. From 2009 to 2020, she was Councillor in charge of the third committee at the Permanent Mission of Madagascar to the UN. In that role, she facilitated the adoption of the first resolution on homelessness by the 58th session of the Commission on Social Development. She's also engaged in human rights, especially women's rights, and is a professor of international relations in the School of Diplomacy in Madagascar. Hanta, you have been a great friend and mentor to the Working Group to End Homelessness, and it is a privilege to have you on the panel today. The floor is now yours.
Apologies, Jean, but Hanta just let me know she's running late. So we're going to have to move to the second speaker and just remember that introduction for when Hanta joins us. Sorry for that.
That's okay. So let's move on. There's no problem. So my next speaker is Marion Kendall, who is the Executive Director of Lifeway Network, an organization focused on ending human trafficking and reclaiming life. Marion takes a vision and makes it a reality through sound strategy development. She intuitively sees the threads of opportunity that wind through an organization, brings them together into a coherent whole, helps others extend their thinking. She's an inspirational leader who tells stories that inspire action, while at the same time is grounded and respected as a credible voice in decision-making, finding strategic financing partners, and establishing governance boundaries. Marion earns a seat at the table wherever she serves. Marion holds a master's in education from Columbia University, a master's degree in social work from Yeshiva University, and is a PhD candidate. Marion, we as have great respect for Lifeways. I was thinking we as UNANIMA International, as we've worked with you before and have collaborated with you on many events. Like all of us, your gift at empowering both survivors, but also the people you work with, is an important gift to us this afternoon. Marion, the floor is now yours.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Jean. And yes, Lifeway has joined the global movement to eradicate human trafficking. And I often hear from others, how are you eradicating human trafficking? Housing first is probably one of the most central and critical need of any woman in peril. Hidden homelessness, trafficking, or experiencing any kind of domestic violence. But Lifeway has this unique opportunity to witness the rawness of the human compassion complexities. We are able to provide services for women who have come from many different walks of life, experiencing different traumas, traumas that led them into their compelling situation, traumas that sometimes stem from not having secure housing. And when we think about hidden homelessness, I think about often hearing from survivors. One of the opportunities that has led them to their trafficking experience began with not having secure housing. Secure housing is so important, and I think sometimes we take that for granted, especially now during a pandemic, and we're recognizing that sometimes folks are couch jumping or living out of their cars, living with their children, not being absolutely absolutely fearful to join shelters and other organizations that provide those kinds of services, because there's a dignity that's lost for survivors when they enter environments that are not equipped to providing for their basic needs, their emotional well-being, their sustainability, and their own agencies are sometimes not registered, not recognized. Their humanity isn't. I recently spoke to someone who's experienced transient homelessness, hidden homelessness, and I asked, what is it? How do you want to be supported? How do you want to be helped? And the person said, before you can provide me with services and tools to help me, sometimes stopping to look me in the eye and say good morning or saying hello or recognizing that I'm a person and that my identity isn't homelessness. My identity is as a person is still intact, but my experience of not being housed properly is my circumstance. And I think that is so important, and we forget that because in our society, we look at homelessness as a it's a thing. Something happened. The person is lazy. They don't want to put on their boots and strap it up and do what's best for them. They're looking for a handout. And I certainly believe that shedding light on this hidden homeless population, we might, I'm hoping, can change the narrative about what homelessness is and how it is not an identity, but a circumstance that we can support and provide needed care for. Um, Lifeway is in that position to support women who are coming from that um, experience that has compelled them into a trafficking situation. And if you are thinking about experiences like the women who are trafficked, housing insecurity in so many ways is that manipulation. Everybody wants to be housed. Everybody wants security. Everybody wants safety. In the absence of that, we make decisions based on our circumstance. We make decisions based on our vulnerability. They are manipulators who capitalize on our vulnerability and thus support that entrance into a life that may not be sustainable. And so, from Lifeway perspective, we are addressing hidden homelessness and we are addressing the homeless population by providing that safe housing for survivors. And one of the things that we recognize in our service delivery is after the woman has experienced her time with Lifeway, it is not sufficient because there has to be a safe exit strategy back into the community for sustainable housing. One of those things that Lifeway looks at is how do we support our survivors as they exit the safe housing? What are their needs? What services may be in place for them to be able to not return to the homeless situation or trafficking situation. And we recognize that supportive services, care coordination, and aftercare needs are extremely crucial to helping the woman not return to any of those situations. And so, from that perspective, Lifeway supports and joins that movement in wanting to reframe the experience of hidden homelessness.
Thank you very much, Marion, for that interesting conversation. And I think one of the things that's important probably for you and for me, housing first is so important before we do anything else. I mean, I think that we cannot expect people to come out of a trauma experience and not have the security of housing. I think the other thing that struck me, that what you just said and is important for all of us to notice, is that dignity is lost entering an environment where your basic rights are not met. And I think the other thing was, which was really, really important, is not identifying somebody by their homelessness, but who they are by name, and asking who they are by name. I think over the years that I worked with homeless people, was one of the things they used to say to me, call me by my name. And I think that name calling is very sacred, it's very important. And so that really helped me this afternoon to fasten that that's really what we're looking for in terms of the hidden homelessness and the security of what is needed to come out of an experience of trauma. So thank you very much indeed, Marion, and we'll be coming back to you again. So now I'd like to move on to our next speaker, which is Sarah Gallardo. Sarah Gallardo has excelled as the founder and the executive director of Sarah Speaks Up since 2015, a nonprofit organization that promotes domestic violence awareness, advocates for domestic violence survivors, and provides resources to women, children, men, and families in need. Sarah shares her lived experiences and encourages those who have lived through domestic abuse to share their experiences and inspire others who may be facing similar circumstances to live free of violence and abuse. Sarah has further worked as the founder of Veterans for Victims program, which connects the survivors of domestic abuse with military veterans who can encourage, empower, and support them through the difficult times, including escorting them to and from court when facing their abusers. In 2019, she served as the delegate at the United Nations CSW, and she is affiliated with the Seroptimus International of the Americas. Sarah wrote Hiding in Plain Sight, a glimpse into the reality of domestic violence, and she did this in 2017, and continues to share her experiences through writing and media. Sarah has been certified as a domestic violence counsellor by Prudence Crandall Centre. She has received several awards for her tireless work. She is a dedicated single mother who is committed to raising her daughter to be well-versed in healthy relationships. Sarah, the words that stand out for me about you was encourage, empower, strengthen, and support. I love how you are described as Sarah Speaks Up. And as we know, it is only when we speak up that we can make the changes in our world. The floor is now yours, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Jean, for that introduction. And thank you all just for being here and for being part of this extremely important conversation. I hope that I can continue to be a helpful part of the solution just across the board. So thank you all. As Marion stated, and it was so well said, so I want to interject some other tidbits. I experienced domestic violence for the span of 10 years with my ex-husband, but in my adult life, and especially going through therapy afterwards, I realized that I was raised in a home where domestic violence was present. And I came to realize how this affects children, because of course this affected me. And this is a very huge part of why I made the decision to engage in a relationship with my now ex-husband. I went through hidden homelessness. And so after leaving my home, which was abusive, I was disowned by my family because they were going through enough of their own turmoil. And quite frankly, it was a toxic, dysfunctional home. So I was homeless then, and actually forced to move in with an abusive man who wasn't my ex-husband, but it was a toxic relationship. And from there, because my start was toxic and dysfunctional, my decisions continued to be with men who were manipulative and controlling, and they wanted that power over me and my life. It didn't feel good to me, but it did feel very familiar. And unfortunately, it felt comfortable. I was uncomfortable with proper love, respect, and support. And I have found that that's a common theme when I speak with domestic violence and abuse victims today. So it's important to always think of these clients or these women as people who are traumatized, that it's important to see them through the lens of trauma and understand with compassion and support that they need a lack of judgment. They need people who are going to help them and support them. And of course, housing comes first. So after I did leave my ex-husband, I was fortunate. I was fortunate to have family members to move in with. But what's unfortunate about that is it became another toxic family environment. And I was put down. I was looked down upon. Some of my family members would speak badly about me behind my back to other family members. And I was very confused why at family gatherings, they would treat me differently. And I felt almost like a pariah. I felt ashamed. I did not feel empowered. I felt like I was being judged all the time. And really, in reality, I was. So for me, I think that was insult to injury to insult to injury. And there was this downward spiral. And, feeling empowered when you are in a situation where, first of all, you've been traumatized. And so you're making decisions through the lens of trauma. You're also experiencing the way other people treat you through that lens as well. And this can be just expounded upon until the person really lacks a feeling of basic humanity. Another thing that I wanted to mention is that in addition to the Veterans for Victims program, I also created the Fresh Start program here in Connecticut, in the United States, where I live now. And that is when in certain states, all the programs available are different. And so here, women can get housing assistance, and this takes time, of course. This is not immediate, so that's another issue. But they can get help with paying for an apartment and heat, childcare, etc. But they have nothing to put in their home spaces. And so that's why I created the Fresh Start program. And all it is we reach out to community members through social media. We say there's a family in need. Here's a list of items that they need. They drop them off or we pick them up. And all of those items are put inside the home of these victims, these survivors. And so they don't feel further traumatized by the fact that now they're living in an empty space and they don't have the money or wherewithal to furnish it. For example, I had a client with a 2-year-old son who we completely furnished their home space. Before we arrived, they were living on a blow-up mattress, both the mother and the 2-year-old son, a toddler, with one pillow and one blanket, and the only other thing that was in there were 2 plastic milk crates with a lamp on it, no lampshade. So he could walk up to it and burn himself. He could knock it over and start a fire. And so we have to think about the full scope of each person's experience and really take into account the fact that most of these women are leaving with their children, and they're all leaving with pretty much the clothes on their back, and if they're lucky, a bag of other items. So I don't want to take up too much time, but thank you again all for having me, and I hope to help later in the discussion.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And can I just thank you sincerely for sharing your lived experience. It's a very sacred story that you've just told us. And I don't want to go over that, except it means a lot to have had to share that with us this afternoon. And it brings out, I suppose, that hidden homelessness again, because oftentimes we don't want to come out and say about the abuse because of the abuser. So you've highlighted that clearly for us. I think the other thing that you brought out, Sarah, was thinking about the women as traumatized. That's their first starting point before any sense of empowerment. And to understand them with compassion and support, and be careful to, that there's no lack of judgment. And again, after talking, you're the second person that has just talked about how important housing is. And it's the starting point. And I think that's really important in this discussion this afternoon. The other thing that struck me as well was about how your service helps those in community who may not be able to be in a refuge or in a shelter or wherever they needed protection, but you recognized that they were in community and that you were able to do something about that. And that again was you and your group empowering others. So thank you very much for that input this afternoon. And so we'll move on to the next speaker, which is Elsa Marie de Silva, which I'm absolutely delighted you're here today with us. And you are the founder of Red Dot Foundation India and president of Red Dot Foundation Global USA. Your platform, Safe City, crowdsources personal experiences of sexual violence and abuse in public spaces. Since Safe City started in December 2012, it has become the largest crowd map on the issue in India and abroad. Elsa Marie has had a series of fellowships and program participations globally. She is listed as one of BBC Hindi's 100 Women and has won several awards, including Government of India Niti Aayog, I'm sure I can't say this, Aayog's Women's Transformation India Award, and the Digital Woman Award in Social Impact by She the People. In 2017, she was awarded the Global Leadership Award for Vital Voices. She is a co-editor and author of The Demographic Dividend and the Power of Youth, published by Lab. She has written several articles and spoken publicly at a variety of spaces and conferences. Prior to Safe City, she was in the aviation industry for 20 years, where she worked with Jet Airways and Kingfisher Airlines. Her last portfolio was Vice President, Network Planning and Charters, where she oversaw the planning and implementation of 500 daily flights. Elsa Marie was also very important for us in that you are part of the policy strategy group on the World We Want 2030, a place for our voices to be heard and where actions will take place. I am delighted you are with us this afternoon, and the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Jean, for having me. And your definition of hidden homelessness is spot on. I didn't realize that this was called hidden homelessness because I have experienced it. When I was a teenager, I walked out in the middle of the night with my mom, not knowing, where we were heading, what we were going to do. And I was just wearing my night clothes. At a moment's notice, my brother, sister, myself, and my mom left our home and stayed with relatives for 3 months. And whilst we were lucky that we had a roof over our head, it was not really our home. So you couldn't relax, you couldn't, let your guard down, you couldn't, feel comfortable like you would in your own home. So I know full well what it means to be homeless. Of course, in no way am I comparing myself with, other people who really don't have a home. But I'm sharing this experience to tell you the reason why I started Safe City. So at that point in time, I made up my mind that I would be financially independent, have my own home. And when I was at that point in my life, I would pay it forward. And come the year 2012, I found myself in that spot where I wanted to do something more than I was doing. I was at the peak of my career, but it wasn't giving me any joy. And I was looking for my purpose. And unfortunately, we had a horrific incident of a young girl on a bus in Delhi where she lost her life after being gang raped by a group of men. And that incident really got me thinking about, this is the moment that I worked all my life for, where I want to pay it forward. And this is my moment to work on the topic of sexual violence. And I launched Safe City at that point to work on public space violence. Why did I do that? Because I know how hard an issue domestic violence is. And I didn't think I was ready to work on that issue or capable enough to work on that issue. But public space violence was very important to me because I knew the importance of financial security. I knew the importance of being able to go for higher education or take up a job that involved travel, that involved independence. And clearly, women and girls who were not safe in public spaces did not have those opportunities. And I wanted them to have that. So what do we do at Safe City? It's a crowd map. That means we crowdsource anonymous stories of sexual and gender-based violence. Initially, we were focused on public spaces, but last year during COVID, we even added domestic violence, online harassment, human trafficking, and other forms of violence. These stories are plotted on a map and they are clustered as location-based trends. The idea is to visually make something that is highly invisible visible. And with that, you can then study the data because every story is a data point. And you can look at the data set to understand the patterns and trends that were emerging and find solutions at the local level. Find solutions at an individual level. Can you better prepare yourself to deal with such violence? Can you have faster and quicker and more effective responses? Or as a community, all of us are part of communities. If we only knew what was happening in our community on a regular basis, could we join forces? Could we have a better understanding? Could we have each other's back? And the last is institutional service providers. There's such low trust within the system, within communities. Could we strengthen that using evidence-based data? Could we work with the police to have better vigilance systems, surveillance systems? I know surveillance is a bad word in many communities, but it really helps as well if that is what the community wants. But you could also work with civic authorities to fix broken infrastructure like streetlights that don't work or public toilets that don't have windows, doors, or lighting. So over the years, we have become the largest crowd map of this collection of stories. We have 19,000 stories. We've worked with close to 1 million people, and it's been the most rewarding thing. But why is it important? It's important because most women and girls don't open up about these stories. They don't understand the spectrum of abuse. And by helping them document their experience on our crowd map, we give a vocabulary to their experience. We also help others to identify what they went through is actually a crime and maybe get a little more courage to break their silence and seek help. For example, in India, we have a law for all of the violence, but people either don't know about it or it's not implemented well. So you can push for that change in your own community. The other reason is that when faced with such violence, we self-censor. We limit our movements, we restrict ourselves from accessing opportunities, and thereby we curtail our own financial independence. I know well that I have, security because I work really hard, but that was also because I studied late at night whilst holding a job. I was able to accept roles where I could travel uh, solo across the country and across the world. And honestly, I loved it. So I could not understand why other people, other young women were turning down these opportunities. And in order to live a full life where you can explore all your opportunities, explore your potential, and live in peace and live in dignity, you need access to those opportunities. And with financial independence, you have options. So for example, I have my own home. So I know nobody can throw me out of my home. And that is a huge security for me. But even if you had financial uh, security, not only a home, but money in the bank, you really can walk out of a violent relationship. You don't have to be dependent on the abuser. And let's not forget that often the abuser is somebody you love very deeply. So it's very, very difficult to leave in these circumstances. During COVID-19 last year, India had one of the strictest lockdowns, and many women reported being abused, but they couldn't leave their homes. One, there were no shelters accepting women, so that was a structural systemic problem. Second, for a city like Bombay, where you have 22 million people, you have only two one-stop crisis centers. And one of them is labeled as a beggar's home. Not that I have anything, but I think it's also the words you use to label these facilities. Are they inviting enough for somebody in deep distress to think of it as an option to go to? It's a different thing that they weren't accepting anyone, so you couldn't direct them there. Third is we couldn't even leave our homes to go to a neighbor's or to another apartment building where probably your parents have a home or your siblings have a home, because apartment complexes weren't allowing people to come in. So, and then the last was mobility. There was no public transport, and most women don't own their own cars or vehicles. So how are you going to get out of this situation? So, we really have to think about how can governments be supportive. In fact, we, Red Dot Foundation, filed a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court of India to list domestic violence prevention services as essential. And it came up for hearing, and the Supreme Court directed us back to the government, and now it's gone into a huge loop. So yes, COVID might end, but there might be another disaster in the future. Are we waiting for more women to die at the hands of the abusers till we recognize the problem? Or can we not work proactively to make it essential? So I'm going to stop there, but I thank you for having this discussion, because I never thought of it as hidden homelessness. And it really needs a lot more people in power to think about an issue that affects 33% of the world, of the female population in the world. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Elsa Marie. And thank you for sharing your own story. I'm very visual, so I could just see you as this child leaving home. And even though you went into housing, it was insecure because it was not your home. I think that was really important. The other thing that struck me, and I think it's really key to all the work that all of us do, is that you in India, the young girl who was gang raped on the bus, you knew that was the point at which you wanted to change and you wanted to do something. It's like that moment that we're all, that key moment when we see something, we're aware of something and we can do it. And I think that was the moment when you did something. Your safe city is it's most interesting, that whole area of the importance of collecting stories and data and plotting it on the map. And I was very struck about the words you said, to visibly make something that is invisible, visible. And I think that's what we're trying to talk about homelessness, because it's often invisible. We keep reading about the invisibility of homelessness. And finding solutions. And I think, you know, we often think globally, but actually it's locally that we have to make these changes. And it's very impressive what you're doing as part of the foundation. I think the other thing that struck me, what you were saying, was to help people and to help women understand crime and how important it is. Information is important and it's critical so that people understand what is happening to them. I was very touched by the way you've worked hard to give back. And there was your generosity of spirit comes over, Elsa Marie, and I've been very touched by that. So thank you very much, and we'll come back to some more during question times. Can I just check if Hanta is there, Kieran, please?
Hanta is here now.
That's great. So I'm delighted, it's my great privilege again to welcome Hanta Fida Cyril Klein, a senior expert in diplomacy and international relations at the service of the Republic of Madagascar, and is presently head of the political pole of the Centre for Analytical and Strategic Studies of the Foreign Ministry, and a senior advisor of the Cabinet of the President of the Senate in Madagascar. From 2009 to 2020, she was a councillor in charge of the Third Committee at the Permanent Mission Madagascar to the UN. In that role, she facilitated the adoption of the first resolution on homelessness by the 58th session of the Commission on Social Development. Hanta is also engaged in human rights, especially women's rights, and is a professor of international relations in the School of Diplomacy in Madagascar. Hanta, you have been a great friend and mentor to us in the Working Group to End Homelessness, and it's really my great pleasure to have you on the panel today. The floor is now yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Hanta. Yes.
All right. I'm sorry, Madagascar is so far away, so I wanted to make sure. I would like to thank you very much for having me, for inviting me to this panel, and also those interesting stories, personal stories of all the panelists were very interesting. Allow me to look the hidden homelessness from another point of view, which is a point of view of Madagascar, and I can say of Africa. So I think I'm here to share also the experiences of what is homelessness in a country like Madagascar, which is in Africa. And this is one of the main points also that we wanted to defend in the resolution on homelessness that we worked on 2 years ago. So hidden homelessness is, as was defined, hidden homeless don't have a secure place to call home. And I think in the case of Madagascar and many countries in Africa, many population, a majority of the part of the population are hidden homeless, because we have the housing, you mentioned the housing problems, and this is really a kind of hidden homeless in our country, as there are many families, women also, who don't have decent housings, and this trigger a lot of difficulties in their situation, the social situations, safety, secure work, difficulties in everyday life. So I think it's also important to see and to look very closely to this kind of situation, which is, I can say, that is hidden homeless, and people most of the time don't pay attention because they think they have a home, but they don't have a home. This is not called home. So the government and the even the civil society, all the people who address homelessness don't really sometimes see this as homeless. They don't see him as they don't see those people as homeless. So this is very important for Africa to look at those people. In Madagascar, as I said, we many homes are not real. Those don't respect the standards as a home, a secure home, a safe home. It's a place where people where you can be feel safe and feel secure and feel good to stay in. And this we have some a lot of this is caused by many of them by natural disasters. People many of the people and women, but especially women also, they um, they are victims of natural disasters and they just lose their homes. And the homes were already not real homes and they lose it. So they have to go from one family to another. They don't have a place, a decent place to stay. They don't have a real family. They stay with relatives. So this is one point to look at. And also we have also like in Madagascar now, and this is like a permanent problems in the south of the country, the drought and also um, the because of the drought there is no food. So families, and many of them are women with children, with small children, they leave their homes, and the decent homes as we can define it. So they leave this home and go to another places, to other regions, and they work a long time, and they stay in another in families, even friends, relatives, and they don't have home. They move from one house to another, and they try to go to the capital. And arriving in the capital, they don't have homes either, and this is really something a big obstacle for them to have a decent life, to find a job, a decent job, to live decently. So this, I think, is one thing that we have to look at also about hidden homeless. All those women and children who have to leave their home, which were not really good home, and they have to go to another place, and they don't have, and they hide. Sometimes they don't even know that they're homeless. Actually, there is not aware. They're not aware actually that they're homeless, and this is really hidden homeless. A second point I want to point out is the gender-based violence. Many a majority of the population of Madagascar are young, and a lot of women. So this is another issue, which the gender-based violence. The home already is not a real home, so we can call them. Um, Sometimes they live together with families. They don't feel at home, and on top of it, they are victims of gender-based violence. So the gender-based violence is something that triggers also this hidden homelessness, and on top of it, there's poverty. So all those difficulties that people have to live in everyday life are very important for me, for us to look at in this kind of situation. And that's where the government has a very important role to play. Not only the government, but also the civil society, the all the stakeholders to help raise awareness that those people don't have home. It's not real home, and they're on top of that. On top of that, they're victims of the gender-based violence. And the government of Madagascar is mobilized. We have the first lady. The first lady of Madagascar is very engaged in the fight against gender-based violence. She's ambassador for UNFPA this violence, and she's very active and very dynamic to fight this. This is a very big problem in Madagascar. So just
Hanta, can you hear us? You're frozen.
Can you hear us, Hanta?
Well, that's the down part of Zoom. So
Well, we have Hanta is in Madagascar, so it's often like this when we call each other. So maybe for the moment, we just might just leave it there for the moment because she may not get back to us. And maybe I think what was really interesting, what she was talking about, was that hidden homelessness in Madagascar, and you know how women move around in terms of is she back? No. How women move around in terms of getting food, and the challenge of getting a decent job. And the other thing is, which I thought was interesting, is that sometimes the women are not aware that they're homeless. And that's often my experience as well over the years, you know, not recognizing that. She also talked about the gender-based violence and the young population of Madagascar, which I experienced when I was there, just mostly women, and how they live together within families and where that violence takes place, you know, that extended family. And that brings about this hidden homelessness that we're talking about. And I think one of the important things that Hanta is saying as a person coming from a government ministry, that how governments and civil society have a role to play in raising awareness. I think that's what we're trying to bring out as a group. Hidden homelessness, taking it out from where it is hidden and shining a light on it. And I think that's what we are trying to do here today. And so now I'd like to invite our speakers and any of our guests to a roundtable discussion really on what we have been talking about. I'm going to ask some questions of our panel and see where that takes us. And if anybody from those participating this afternoon, if you want to write a question in the chat box, and if we can get to it, we will be delighted to do so. If not, we will follow it up after this webinar. Is Elsa Marie still with us? She is?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. One of the things that I would like to have a conversation with you about is what would you consider is required to feel safe and empowered? And how can member states and civil society, or perhaps other political actors, work to achieve this for women, children and girls? And looking at it from the perspective of safety in our cities. And the final point of that question, how important is data? And is it useful for individuals and communities?
That's a great question. So I would say education, because without an education, you can't really get a job. And when I say a job, I mean a good paying job, which will help you become financially independent. And the education should also include, you know, topics like what are your rights? Because if you don't know what your rights are, often you won't know how to even, you know, seek remedial measures for what you're experiencing. So, and then the second part of the education is financial literacy, which a lot of women take for granted or don't think it's important. I feel it's absolutely critical that you know how to operate a bank account, how to save money, how to invest well, and therefore not be dependent on other people. So education, access to finances as well, and basic infrastructure. In a country like India, if you are abused, there are very few shelter homes. Where do you go? You know, so when we get distress calls, we ask them, what is it that you want to do? And they have no clue. Can you go to your father's place? And in many cultures, they don't want to take their daughters back, because in fact, it would amount to bringing shame and dishonor to their family. So they'd rather, keep silent about it and let her suffer. And there have been a few women who've been killed because of this, where they haven't been able to leave the abusive relationship, or when they've left the abusive relationship in order to protect the honor of the family, they've been killed by their own family members as well. So and creating safe spaces to talk about it. So for example, this whole conversation, how many of us have stories to share? And that's where Safe City comes in, because we make it easy for you to share your story anonymously. I get it that it's hard to talk about it in a public fora like this. You don't have to, but you need to document it, because if you didn't document it, in effect, it didn't happen. And therefore, there's no proof of it. And once you have documented it, especially on a platform like Safe City, which is a very structured way of documenting it, you can use that data. Think about the Me Too movement. What were they trying to achieve? The call to action was put your story out there in the form of a tweet and show the world the scope of the problem. Yes, we saw the scope of the problem. And a lot of men were named and shamed. And yes, there was, action taken where some people lost their jobs and maybe policies were introduced in the workspace. But can you really use that data? You can't, because it's not in a format that you can, study, analyze, and pick up patterns and trends. And that's why I feel Safe City really has a value. And I would encourage everybody to check out our crowd map. It's a global app, and you can use it, test it out. If you'd like to partner, we'd love to partner with you. So yes, data is important, but also infrastructure, because when my mom and I left our home, there was nowhere we could go, but thankfully she had friends, or we had relatives that put us up. But there's no long-term way. Even like somebody on the panel said that they help to furnish a house, they give you some seed money. I don't think there's anything like that in India. I would love to start something like that in the future, but at the moment, I will concentrate on Safe City.
Just can you say a little bit more, Elsa Marie, about the data? Because we certainly would be interested in talking to you some more about it. The importance of telling the stories and collecting the stories, and you're able to map where they are. What happens at the end of it? What do you do with it? Where does that reach governments and local politicians? How? Because that would really help us in terms of the working group to end homelessness. It's at that point we're looking at the importance of data, but then what do you do with data? And as you said, how is that analyzed?
Yes. So we work on the concept of crowdsourcing, but also peer reviews. So think about the regular apps that we normally use. Think about TripAdvisor, where people rate spaces like hotels, restaurants, etc. And we, if you're planning a holiday, would look at these reviews to make decisions. That is how Safe City operates. We collect stories from people who've experienced it. It gets collated on the map and is available in the open source format. That means it's available to you at the very granular level. That is the location, the category of violence, the date, the time, and so on and so forth. And that helps you as an individual to improve your own situational awareness. What I mean is helping you understand the nature of the crime and create your own strategies to deal with it. As an organization, we facilitate this data gathering and exchange with other nonprofits who want to work, who already work in local areas, but they may not be working on the specific issue of sexual violence. And even if they are, they may not have the data at scale. So we help them look at it at scale rather than individual stories. whilst individual stories are important, where they can give them maybe legal help and counseling help, looking at it as patterns and trends really allows you to work on policy change, on system level change with people who need to be brought into the room. Now, it's not always police and it's not always civic authorities. We've even worked with religious leaders to talk to the men and boys about it, because let's not forget that they are the ones who really need to be challenged with this inappropriate behavior. For example, our partner Jane in Kenya, she works in Kibera, one of the largest slums in Nairobi. She had put what she calls talking boxes in the local schools.
You're breaking up a little bit. I'm sorry, you're breaking up slightly.
So Jane in Kibera, which is the largest slum in Nairobi, put what she calls talking boxes. That is, boxes placed in schools where children could put little notes on what they were experiencing it. And she would then collect these notes once a week and then read them and try to figure out what needed to be done. What we helped her do is digitize her data and helped her look at it as a whole data set, like which school was frequently showing these kind of stories, what were the common themes emerging, where were they occurring. And Kibera is not even, they don't even have proper street names because it's an informal settlement, but using descriptors like near the big mosque, the pink building, Penguin Bar, or whatever it is, you were able to cluster the data and say, okay, this is where it's happening. Who can we bring to have a discussion now that we can show them the data? And another thing with data at a data set level is, when we tell our individual story, people often find fault with us. You were in the wrong place. You did this. You caused it to happen. You were wearing the wrong clothing. But when you can show it to be a trend that is occurring constantly, they don't dispute with the data. There's no time to ask 20 women, why were you in the wrong place, right? They can't deny it.
I think what was important, what you just said to us now, was in terms of the policy and system level change and who needs to be in conversation, who needs to be sitting around that table. And I think that's something we might come back to you again about, because I think the more many of us are sitting around the table talking about this, how important it will be for the future of those we're talking about today, which is the hidden homeless. Could I just pose another question to Sarah? In terms of violence against women, which emerges both as a cause and a consequence of hidden homelessness, what ways can we address the intersection of violence and hidden homelessness? And what practices would be a path to solutions? And I suppose the other part of that question, Sarah, is how important is it to have the voice of the lived experience?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you for that question. I think, first of all, we have to make it easier for women to leave than it is to stay. And I think we have to make it known that it is so much easier that these systems are in place. We work so much on awareness, and yes, awareness is important. But I'm not sure who needs to get the memo that I'm recalling in the United States, we had a campaign called the DARE campaign, which was part of the war on drugs. And this was taught in every school across the board. So I know that the infrastructure to teach kids this message exists because I lived through it in the 80s. And if we could have a similar super saturated message to our children, to our women, everywhere, just on billboards, and they had TV commercials, we could do social media, we're teaching it to the children. So there's no question, is there help? Is there hope? they will know that, yes, there is. Now, I think it's important to look at what structures exist. So I know that there's an issue specifically in the United States where we have a shift from manufacturing to technology. So we have these structures, these factory buildings that are basically abandoned. And I'm pretty sure that they exist in every city and all over. I can't speak to other countries, but I assume that something similar exists. And so possibly a campaign to make use of those existing structures. So not only is it not a blight on our cities, but we can make sure that they're safe, you know, obviously rebuild and put women and children to be housed in these spaces. So first we work on this awareness campaign, much like I said, like the DARE, we put it everywhere so people know. Then we make use of those spaces that already exist. So we put people in there. Now that's answering to the question of housing and homelessness. But what then we would have to do is support that with other programs. So like I mentioned, the Fresh Start, where we take community members' donations. Now everybody has heard of, I'm sure, spring cleaning. And I feel like, so I'll speak specifically for the United States. People have a surplus of all kinds of different household items, and they're really happy to give those. You know, that's why we have Goodwill, Salvation Army, you know, Savers as donation spaces. But, you know, instead, we let these people know your donated items are going to women and children who are not currently, you know, they are without home because of domestic violence. And I think, you know, this isn't necessarily about placing blame, but it has to be said that most often the abusers are men. And we have to take a good hard look at why that is acceptable. I know this would touch on religion, culture, societal norms, expectations of men being sort of the provider or having to be the stark head of household. And also we talked about women. So women need to know that their communities are behind them. They need to know that that we have these kinds of programs in place. I'm reading Elsa Marie's comments about, you know, future housing. So they have programs like that in place for veterans here in the United States, where they will get them into a safe housing situation, whether it's a tiny home or a smaller community where houses have been built specifically for people to live in. So that's great. But we also need to look at educating these women so that they're not taking these sort of bare bones kind of jobs. So these financial positions where they're still just making it financially. You know, so if there could be some financial programs to help the women to, you know, substitute some of that income until we get to that place. You know, I keep thinking of when I was going through my situation, and I really took a good hard look at, is it easier to stay in this situation? And for a while I did, for a long time, as a matter of fact. And to be honest, my ex-husband shot at me on one occasion and I still stayed. I actually married him after he shot at me. So, and that had a lot to do with, you know, threatening my family members, threatening my pets, you know, saying with the whole manipulation factor of, you know, things will get better as long as we get married. Things will get better if we have a child. And neither of those are ever true. But I believed it at the time. And so I think, you know, fear really played into my decision. And I'm sorry, there was a second part of your question, and I
suppose I would
sure
be going back to the question as just exactly what you're talking about, and in working over the years as a therapist, in terms of how do you break that cycle that you just talked about now. And I do think it's important to have that place to tell your story. And I know UNANIMA International really believe in the lived experience. And would you say that's a good thing, or is that abusive as well, in terms of is it important?
You're asking if it's important to share one's story?
Yes, we talk about the need to have the lived experience of people, and I think that it's like, don't talk about us without us. So I'm asking the question, is it important from your perspective, Sarah?
Absolutely, no question. It's important to have people who are comfortable sharing their story, because it's almost like a representation of so many others. We understand that every survivor's story is unique, and that survivor is an individual, but there are most certainly repeated patterns and repeated cycles, to the point where oftentimes myself as a domestic violence counselor, you can almost just switch the names out. And we've got very, very similar occurrences. And I think someone mentioned previously how COVID has been used as a weapon. So it's almost like anything that's available to the abuser, they will use as a tool against their victim. And of course, we've seen that happen globally with COVID. But I think it's important to meet every survivor exactly where they are, and do that without judgment or condemnation, which, we here who are part of this conversation, we know that and we understand, but the general society does not understand. So it's important to help the people who are helping the victims as well. And so educate them as to how to treat that person. And of course, sharing our stories is so important, but it has to be done with respect and confidentiality in mind, and the comfort of the survivor, because we all know that one of the first issues is that their power and control has been stripped away from them. And so at every step of the way, it's important to do a check-in with that survivor and say, does this feel comfortable to you? Is this what you want? Do you know what you want? If you don't, can we help you to realize that? How can we facilitate you understanding what you want and need? Because that's one step in the direction of empowering them once again.
Thank you very much. That was a powerful answer. Thank you very much. Marion, can I just ask you, I suppose I was thinking yesterday about this, that in light of COVID-19 and Lifeways Network, how do some of the people keep well? Because we've faced so many challenges with coronavirus that has hit us this past year. And I suppose, how have the women used their coping skills, during this time?
Okay, can you hear me?
Great, yes.
Absolutely. Jean, I listened to the last question to Sarah, and there was a part of that Sarah's question that I really, really would like to spend maybe a few seconds talking about. And it was asking what is required for a person to feel empowered. And it would segue right into answering the question you have just asked me. How has the women managed and supported themselves throughout this pandemic? But I wanted to talk about a little bit about what is required for a survivor to feel empowered. And before we can provide services and those tools that you can see, I really do believe in radical hospitality. And I really would like to share the definition of radical hospitality. And it is a term, it can be defined as a practice of putting extraordinary effort on and emphasis on making people feel welcome. And why do I say so? As a service provider, I can't move the needle for supporting a woman if I don't meet her where she's at. By making that eye contact, by not looking away from her, by humanizing her experience, by helping her to recognize her own self-determination and understanding that she has that capacity, and reframing the questions that we ask before we can provide needed services. Not what happened, not what was wrong, what went wrong in your life. That blaming, that experience of feeling the shame and guilt of being hidden in your hidden homelessness. Rather than asking what's wrong with you, we reframe that and ask the woman what happened. And when we're able to ask her what happened, we humanize. We're asking her to share her viewpoint. We're asking her to have a voice. We're encouraging her to have that voice. And I have recognized in my practice when we have asked women, what happened to you, what's wrong, they shut down, they clam up. There's no trust in service delivery. There's no trust in the provider. You're another entity that want to exploit me, take away this gory knowledge of how I've been abused, about how I've been sexualized, how many times this has happened to me. Take that, put it in your documentation, and provide me no needed service. When we say what happened, the woman is able to make a decision in how she wants her story to be heard and how she wants us to journey and help her reframe that experience of her exploitation. And I just wanted to emphasize, before any services can be provided, we have to recognize the humanity of the person and come away from them being homeless to my identity. If, for instance, Marion, my name is Marion. My circumstances, I don't have a home. I am here because I'd like you to help me activate the areas in my being that can help me to get there. And first, to activate those areas, we have to address the person's biopsychosocial needs. We have to address their mental health needs. When depression hurts. When you're experiencing full-on depression, you do not have the capacity to make those rational decisions that you want to seek housing. So sometimes as a society, as a culture, we blame the person for their circumstance. We criminalize the person for their circumstance. And can you hear me?
Yes, it's okay now. Thank you.
And life where we try to come away from that narrative. So then I'll segue into how has the women in the safe houses been supported throughout this pandemic. I'll quote a woman: "I've been living in a pandemic as long as I have been living, in depression and anxiety, being trafficked, being abused, being raped. All those things is a pandemic for a person internally. We don't see it. So when the pandemic happened, the women carried on and continued their living because that's an external pandemic. And their internal was much greater, and they have been coping with their own agency, whatever means that they could, to live every single day, coupled with what's happening on the outside. I'll give you something that's so important to survivors. Anyone that is experiencing—
1 minute, Marion. 1 more minute.
One more minute. Is food is so important to folks. In the safe house, we recognize that the survivors love cooking their foods, and that food is a coping mechanism. It connects them to their culture. It connects them to their own intimacy of their humanity and who they are. So to top it all off, besides all the wonderful things that they have had to use to cope, food is an extremely important coping mechanism.
You know what I loved there, Marion, was your radical hospitality, because I think that's really important. You know, putting every effort into making people feel welcome at home and named. And I just love that radical hospitality. So unfortunately, as always, time runs out when you're having a good time and you're in interesting conversation. And I think just for ourselves, we'll possibly go to part 2 at another time. But I suppose one of the things for all of us that organised this afternoon, that it's essential to keep homelessness as a topic of focus within the UN community and international diplomacy. And today's event was one way of us doing that. When we talked earlier about the paradigm shift, this will only happen if we function as a community of people who want to make a difference, who want change. And change, as we know, is a constant process in life. We do not want the work we do to be superficial, like quickly looking at homelessness as chaos or just complex, as often people will refer to. But my hope is that we become communities of inquiry, information gatherers, storytellers from the lived experience, researchers, data collectors, so that we all feel we're in this together. And that's my desire as we move forward. And so now I'm going to pass it over to Marianne for her closing summary and remarks.
Thank you, Jean. I think that this has been a marvelous event, obviously one that we could continue on for another hour at least. So maybe we have to do it again and start with the additional questions that we've prepared. We've heard a lot. We've heard a lot about people living in fear. We have heard about people who can help overcome that fear, particularly the fear and the trauma of violence and homelessness. People who help others do their storytelling with dignity, provide radical hospitality, do data mapping, lots of different solutions. But as I sat here thinking, all I could think about is that this is the 21st century. 76 years after the founding of the United Nations, 73 years since the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was created, 26 years since the Beijing Platform for Action imagined a world where all women and girls can exercise their freedoms and choices, realize their rights, to live free from violence, to go to school, which was so emphasized, to participate in decisions, and to earn equal pay for equal work. Yet here we are, shaping a definition of hidden homelessness, conceptualizing how women forced to hide in fear and insecurity, traumatized by either violence or a lack of economic, social, or cultural security, can be empowered to realize those not just God-given rights, but political and civil rights. Sad but true that the right to a home is still a conversation for many, many people in this world. We are so very grateful today for the women who spoke, for their lives and for their work. Sarah, Elsa Marie, Marian, Hanta, and Jean. You have shown a light on this very important issue. We say thank you on behalf of the Vincentian family, 5 NGOs who are accredited by ECOSOC and work at the UN on issues of poverty and homelessness, and UNANIMA International, a group of 22 NGOs accredited and working on these issues at the UN. As we close this session, may the voices of the women we have heard today haunt us, prompt us, encourage us, energize us. We need to continue to work to end homelessness in all its forms, and particularly hidden homelessness. so that we might build forward better and enable women to live in peace and security, in empowering them as well as all of humanity to build this better world. So we say thank you. We hope that all of the participants have enjoyed it. We saw some questions from you. We hope if you haven't seen an answer to it, you will after this session. And once again, thank you for all who spoke, who moderated, and Kieran and Natalie, who are our technicians on this event. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you.